America's hopes, the basic mission here, may still be achievable. But wars are won by firepower, willpower, and staying power. The United States and its allies have the firepower, but do we, have the willpower and the staying power for the long haul?
That, of course, is Dan Rather, reporting from Kabul, Afghanistan, as part of his new documentary for HDNet about the state of the war there. Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries on the planet. It's a place where the infant mortality rate is third highest in the world, where fewer than 1 in 3 adults can read. But despite its challenges on modern things like health and literacy and clean water and electricity, Afghanistan does excel at something, and it has for more than 1,000 years. Afghanistan, of course, is known as the graveyard of empires. Alexander the Great and the mighty armies of ancient Greece couldn't hold on to it, nor could the British in the 19th century, though not for a lack of trying. And after nearly 10 years, the Soviet Union fled in 1989. Here in America, we really paid a lot of attention to that because the Soviets' defeat in Afghanistan helped get rid of the other world superpower that was our rival. Remember, back when there were 2? And now, after 7 years of us fighting there, the United States military is getting ready to double down, sending in 30,000 more troops to go with the 34,000 who are already there. President Obama campaigned on the idea that Iraq, the war in Iraq, diverted badly needed resources from Afghanistan, from what he called the central front in the war on terror. But as Dan Rather found when he interviewed General David McKiernan, the man in charge of our military effort there, defining victory in Afghanistan isn't easy.
How will we know when we have, quote, won?
Tough question to answer. I think we've got to look at global terrorism and al-Qaeda, which certainly has franchises outside of this region, and we've got to continue to work in an intelligence-driven way to see what their reach is, what their impact is, not only within the region but globally. And over time, I think when we determine that they are marginalized, contained, perhaps even defeated, then we'll know we've won.
Marginalized, contained. In fact, in Mr. Rather's documentary, it is almost jaw-dropping to hear the honesty from some of the soldiers who are under General McKiernan's command when they talk about their mission.
The war is definitely winnable. But it's not really a war. I mean, you're not really fighting against people. You're fighting against, Taliban is a way of life. So it's kind of hard to fight that.
Kind of hard to fight that anywhere, let alone in the graveyard of empires. Joining us now is Dan Rather. He is the host and managing editor of Dan Rather Reports. His program, The Commander, has just premiered on HDNet. Mr. Rather, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's great to see you.
Glad to be with you. Thank you.
When you asked General McKiernan, when will we know we have won the war in Afghanistan? In the rest of your interview, he answers you immediately. He never stutters. He never ums. He never ahs. And you got this great pause out of him. He waited a moment before he was able to respond. How did you read that?
I read that as he's not certain himself what, quote, when would be. Certainly not assured about what the exit strategy is. Let me emphasize that he's a terrific general. He's exactly the kind of person one would want in the U.S. military and commanding this very difficult situation. However, he knows, and the reason he paused, and it was very insightful, it was for him a long pause.
Yes.
Because he wanted to give a truthful answer, but he also wanted to give an answer that had at least some semblance of optimism in the answer. But I think it's clear that we're in a stage, and I think we're still in this period, won't be for long, in which policy is being reviewed from the bottom up. I think a new policy, a new strategy, and some new tactics will be forthcoming. I'd be surprised if they aren't forthcoming fairly quickly. That's part of what this doubling down, as you said, of troops, and I like the phrase because it's just about doubling the number of troops there, is all about.
Thinking about a bottom-up review, looking at the very base level of what's happening on a person-to-person basis in Afghanistan, and having the strategy sort of evolve from that rather than a top-down look. In your documentary, your producers and reporters head out with American troops who are on the border. The border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. There's a group of about 30 troops who are in charge of patrolling an area that is 10 times the size of Manhattan. And to me, that says two things: incredible bravery and ingenuity, and the question of whether or not it is folly. What can they accomplish?
And believe me, the troops discuss this among themselves. They do in our program. They're very dedicated. They'll do anything asked of them, but they know the size of this challenge. They also know that while we, and you and I here tonight, are talking about Afghanistan, the core problem, the heart, the red beating heart of this problem is in Pakistan, right across the border in those territories that are west of Peshawar. And I'll be surprised, I'm constantly surprised, if Richard Holbrooke, who, a very experienced American diplomat, who's been appointed by President Obama to answer to him personally about it, that Holbrooke doesn't try to make the case, look, we need to do things inside Afghanistan, but the gut problem is across the border in Pakistan. And I think the bottom-up review of strategy and tactics will have to do that once the snow clears and the mountain passes, there's going to be a lot of killing done in that part of Pakistan.
Are there essentially two choices for American policymakers now? I guess three. One is end it, bring them home. The other two are counterinsurgency, which is the way that General McKiernan describes his mission to you. Counterinsurgency, as you know, is a troop-intensive prospect. It means essentially creating a legitimate government, a legitimate source of authority, and a legitimate use of force in a country. The third option is counterterrorism, which is a much smaller, more targeted mission, which is not about building up a state, which is about eliminating an enemy.
That's right.
Are those the three choices?
I think those are the three choices, and I think number three is the basic choice. You could say number three, which is to try to defeat terrorism, melded with some aspects of counterinsurgency, is probably where it's going.
Well, it's hard to imagine them melding because one of them is sort of a police action or police action on steroids, and one of them is a long-term occupation in a country that's never had a legitimate government.
Well, and your point is so well taken. The ancient Greeks, the British, and the Soviets tried to do a version of what we're doing, but I do feel obliged to say, because it's true, that they all tried to colonize Afghanistan. We are not seeking to colonize Afghanistan. The Soviets made no bones about it. They were coming in to take over the country. They wanted to run the country, wanted to be there 100 or 1,000 years from now. That is not the case with what we're trying to do. But I also want to underscore that for the troops who are asked to do what we're asking them to do in Afghanistan, imagine it, 30 soldiers responsible for about 350 square miles of territory, and this is wicked terrain. We're asking them to do too much.
One last quick question for you. As a man, as a veteran newsman, as a veteran of the not only the war in Afghanistan, the current war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the Soviet war in Afghanistan in the 80s, you were there. How would you rate our national discussion about our security interests and what we're going to do next in Afghanistan? Are we having the right debate? Are we covering it enough?
We're not having the right debate, and we certainly are not covering it enough. I think not having the right debate may be in the process of changing, but we have to keep in mind that with President Obama, he has his economic meltdown, the Middle East, Iraq, so many things. But I do think that this area of Pakistan, where most of the trouble originates, is going to wind up to be high on his agenda, and he'll start spending a good deal of time on that with Richard Holbrooke's help.
Dan Rather, host and managing editor of Dan Rather Reports on HDNet. Such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Rachel. Thanks so much.
Dan Rather's next new program is called The Castle Doctrine. It premieres on Tuesday on HDNet.